Okay, I think we're ready to get started again. You all look like you are. So now we get to take over because Brian let us have the mics. Yay!
Hey.
Before Christina takes the floor to wrap everything up today, and I have the honor of introducing her. First, we wanted to give away two books. I have one more of mine, and rather than just picking someone at random for this or something like that, we wanted to bring it back to the things that matter. So I'm going to give this book to the person who can tell me. You don't have to provide photographic evidence. Who here has the biggest dog? Sorry, cat people. I just knocked you out of the running. What's your dog? Pitbull? Okay. Do we have it? What's the approximate weight? We got a 50-pound pit bull. Do we have any big? Yes. What's your dog?
They're like, we can beat that.
Oh, we got a 95-pound chocolate lab. Do we have any bull mastiffs in the room? Any Great Pyrenees?
Look on the back.
Yes. We got a 140-pound part Akita, part German Shepherd. That is a cat.
Backwards.
Okay, I think the Akita German Shepherd wins it. Yay!
Yay!
I would love to meet your dog.
There's a picture.
Oh my God. Oh, it's a really cute dog. Okay, next book. Thank you. That was worth it.
Furthest? What's that? How about who came furthest? Let's get rid of the other book.
Who came the furthest today?
Woo!
San Francisco. Baton Rouge. That's width of the country versus height. Okay, so yes. Congratulations. Yay.
Woo! Okay, we got books given away.
So now I have the supreme honor of introducing our closing speaker, Christina Woodkey. She's probably hers is probably a name that is already familiar to everyone's because she founded the Institute of Information Architecture. She's also the author of Information Architecture, Blueprints for the Web, which I know sits on lots of bookshelves whose owners are here today. She also wrote Radical Focus and Pencil Me In, this new one. She also collects stuffed cephalopods for all of you octopus-loving people out there. And then in a past career, she also laid important groundwork online for Justin Timberlake. And with that, hit it.
My daughter's sweatshirt. Hi. Hello, folks. So I'm trying to pull off a little bit of a hat trick today. I've been listening to everybody's talks, and I put together the talk during the entire days because there were many themes that I thought were really interesting and important. But the most important theme was, hey, how about this information architecture thing? What if it was a thing? So since we're talking about information architecture for good, I want to start with a story from the Zen Buddhist Center in San Francisco. So I love listening to their Dharma talks online, and sometimes the Zen stories are very accessible, and sometimes they're kind of bug me, and I think about them for weeks and weeks and weeks, and this is one of those that will not leave me alone. So you may remember the story of the Buddhist monks who set themselves on fire to protest the Vietnam War, and apparently there was a conversation going on at the Dharma Center about should we protest? Should we get involved? Bad things are happening in the world. How do we know when we should step in? Because, you know, the monks have this rule of non-involvement. They're not supposed to get emotionally upset. They're not supposed to get involved. And so this young monk goes to the master and he says, how do I know when I should do something? And the master walks him outdoors and walks him through the garden into a bamboo garden, and he says, picks up, this is a short stick, and this is a long stick. I have to say that a lot of choices in our life are a lot like that. You are welcome to continue puzzling over it the way I puzzle over it, but I think sometimes you need a short stick and sometimes you need a long stick. Sometimes we do something, sometimes we do nothing. Richard Saul Wurman says that information architecture is a whole way of thinking. This is from Dan Klein, the current president's talk about 5 lessons from Richard Saul Wurman. He says, the aim is not to make something look good, but to make it be good. And I think as we've seen the rise of design, we see a lot of good-looking lipsticks on pigs. We see a lot of pretty things. I was looking at Canvas, and I got really excited. It's a learning management system that we use at Stanford, and it is gorgeous, Helvetica, gray, and I cannot use it to save my life. I have to get the TAs to set something up, and they've had hours of training. Like, looking good is not being good. Now, I do want to put a trigger warning out. Now, there's been some jokes about trigger warnings, but I've learned through my personal experience as a teacher that these are really important things to talk about, because some people do have post-traumatic stress syndrome. And so knowing that I'm going to talk about race, gender, and I will curse occasionally, you need to be an informed audience. Take care of yourself. Step out if you need to, okay? Trigger warning. Sorry, I said I wouldn't make a joke. Information architecture is dead. Back in California, this seemed to be a true thing. Like, I would talk about information architecture, and people would be like, does anybody do that anymore? Is that a thing? And then I saw this post. Facebook is hiring its first ever information architect. So, if The Princess Bride has taught us nothing, mostly dead is slightly alive. So let's see if we can resurrect the dead body of information architecture. I'm going to tell you the story of how I became an information architect. And I love stories. So once upon a time, a long time ago, I was a painter, because everybody who's in the business that's my age did not come into it the straight way, right? So I was a painter, and I was waiting tables, and at the height of my painting career, I had a one-woman show in a pizza parlor. I was making it, right? And my career at Moose's, however, as a waiter, was very successful. I was making $80K a year, working about 25 hours a week, which even now is quite respectable, right? However, I was getting carpal tunnel, my feet hurt, I was tired, I was bored out of my head, and a friend of an ex-boyfriend said, hey, CNET is building a directory killer, a Yahoo killer. We're going to make a directory, because this is before Google, this is before search was big. And I said, sure, why not? And I reviewed 50 websites a week. I ended up teaching myself HTML and got a job at egreetings.com, where I would catalog greeting cards. And I would write little cute things about them, like make somebody's day happy with a note from Snoopy to Woodstock. And I would create the categories. I would organize these cards. I was an information architect the whole time. I just didn't know what it was called yet. So again, I want to remind you, 1997-ish, this is what the world looked like. There were directories. Google was brand new. Nobody was really using it yet. Things were pretty simple back there then. But it was getting crazy because everybody was scanning all their brochures and putting all this paper into electronic form and putting it online. There was too much information. Richard Saul Wurman said, there's a tsunami of data crashing into the beaches of the civilized world. Like, we are terrified of all these brochures we're scanning and putting on the web. There are too many of them. We can't find anything. And he said there's a new breed of graphic designers, exhibition designers, illustrators, and photographers whose passion is to make the complex clear. So once again, we all came from someplace else. And I gathered with Lou Rosenfeld and a few other people at Asilomar, which is Spanish theoretically from somebody who doesn't speak Spanish very well, for refuge by the sea. And we created the Institute for Information Architecture because we believed that organizing information mattered. We even defined it. DT, I'm slightly embarrassed to admit, defining the damn thing, that's me. I wrote it to a mailing list because I said if I can't define it, I can't sell it. I was a consultant at the time. And so we decided it was the organization of information for retrieval, for understanding, and for use. 3 really important concepts. And Jesse James Garrett, a friend of mine at the time, built this. And look, he made us a little spot. We sat right next to interaction design in this beautiful new model. And this is when information architecture got a little bit smaller. In the early 90s, mid-90s, people thought information architecture were the conductors of the web, and they would organize everything. But now they were starting to become librarians, and sadly, nobody respects librarians as much as they should be respected because they are God's gift to humanity. Long line of librarians right here. But it became small. And then this is Dion Saffer's, and it got even smaller, although it's as big as architecture, I suppose. So I guess that's fairly respectable. And to the point where I was at the Interactions conference, sitting next to a very well-known interaction designer, and I was watching this talk about a taxonomy of food. This guy had actually worked with chefs and basically did Pandora for food. It's amazing. It's called food spotting, figuring out what foods go with other foods. And I turned to this guy who'd been doing interaction design since mid-90s, and I said, hey, you have an information architecture talk at your conference. And he said, how is this information architecture? There's no librarians involved. So information architecture had kind of gotten marginalized. But what hadn't happened is we didn't have less data. We have another information tsunami. Now, Carl Fast calls it small data. It's data that there's too much of for humans and too few of for machines. Your email inbox. Tell me that's not an information tsunami that's making your life complicated. Dave Gray's, I'm just gonna browse through his 1,500 photos on Flickr, right? How about he's got 46,000 since he joined. How about these 94 friend requests on Facebook? You're just gonna go through and try to remember where you met all these people? 140 received invitations on LinkedIn. Who are these people? Maybe it's just my problem. I've talked to too many people. And we have this wonderful sentiment, which I think you may recognize, which has led to this result. Thank you, Margot. So we have the rise of fake news. And I think that it's been fairly well documented, and if you're not familiar, Technically Wrong by Sarah, I mispronounce her name every time. And she gets offended, and this is being videoed, so Sarah. She, in her wonderful book, Technically Wrong, which you should all buy, now she'll forgive me, she talks about how Facebook first had an editorial team of journalists, an editor, and people who actually knew what news looked like. And this editorial team would help say, this is real news, look at the URL, look at the sources, look at all the things journalists actually use. But what happened is the conservatives were accusing Facebook of bias, and even though Facebook said they found no existence of bias, they tossed out the humans, they laid off the whole team, and they went to the algorithm before it had been proven. And almost immediately, fake news started showing up. Literally, if that was a little bigger, you would see 3 days later, the first piece of completely fake news was starting to show up. You may be familiar with this. Google's algorithm was miscategorizing people in Picasa, people as gorillas, which is horrifying. We have the North Point recidivism algorithms. So this is also from Technically Wrong. It's also horrifying. What happened is people wanted to figure out how likely are people to commit a crime again once they've already committed one. And so they created an algorithm to advise judges, because judges are racist and biased, right? Well, it turns out the data is racist and biased because it was built on historical data. Because people are more likely to pull over, police are more likely to pull over people of color were more likely to be reaccused. Bad data went into the algorithm. The algorithm is racist. Algorithms are rule sets based on people. We've made a horrible mistake. We treat machines like they're smarter than us. And I think maybe we just don't trust people. It's really interesting walking around the halls of the computer science department at Stanford. I hear a lot of young people talking about how people suck and people are mean and people are bad. And I think there's a certain mindset that maybe machines would be better. Maybe machines would cure us of our various ills. Maybe machines could show us a way forward. But the reality is people make mistakes. People can also fix those mistakes. The machines are nothing but what we tell them. And this was very frustrating to me at the end of information architecture's downfall, because the information architects were not embracing algorithm design. They were saying, oh, that's that engineer's stuff. Those engineers will do it for us. They will fix it. And I thought of them as sort of cabinet makers who didn't realize IKEA was coming. It's like, people, the future is algorithms. Let's get somebody who's user-centered, who talks to people, who does card sorts, to help design these algorithms so we don't end up in these places. There was also this attitude, which is we don't need IA because search. search, it's fixed to Google's magic, right? Everybody's happy. Well, I will tell you, I was looking for this photo of my daughter that's so cute. And I was like, okay, it's in my hard drive somewhere that Apple names with the date it was taken. Okay, maybe it's on Facebook. Maybe it's on Twitter. Maybe it's on Google. Can Google find Amelie Kimono? No. And actually, I'll tell you the truth about this picture, which I do love. I was actually looking for one of her eating sushi. The sushi guy used to make little snowmen for her. I literally have not found it. It's one of my favorite photos, and I cannot find it anywhere. I remember when I was a little kid, and I would watch this TV show, The Family Feud, which is back now, by the way. And back when I was a kid, they asked the question, if your house was on fire, what would you grab? What would you pull out? And the number one answer? We have burned down our photos by letting Facebook and Twitter and Apple give them to us for free. We cannot find the things that are most precious to us. The love letters that my ex-husband and I exchanged when we were first falling in love, they were emails. Where are they now? One of my students used WhatsApp to talk to her grandmother as she was dying. Where is it now? We are losing the things that are precious to us because it's free. It's time to change and think about information architecture for retrieval. The most boring part of information architecture is also the most precious part of it. It's time for us to take that back. As well, of course, classification has consequences. Read your George Lakoff. The Second Amendment. I don't know if you know this, but it was considered about the militia, not about the right to bear guns, until actually about 2008, when there was a landmark court opinion that said it was more about the right to bear arms. I believe we are experiencing the consequences of that particular classification choice. There's also the increasing pinkification of our girls. Compartment T, who are we? What compartment? I think it's nice that you got to pick your compartment as opposed to having it chosen for you. One of my students, Levi, he did this extraordinary reclassification of gender and what does it mean to have gender. And we're actually going through a really interesting revolution, at least the one I'm observing from my students, where they're demanding that gender not be binary, that there be hundreds of genders, that gender becomes something that you wear like a custom-made suit as opposed to some cheap thing you got at Ross, okay? So we're changing how we think about it, and it's working. So the Game Developers Conference, which I go to every year, it's huge. It is blocks and blocks of conference centers. And this year they gave you badges to allow yourself to say how you'd like to be identified by the security people. It's a tiny step, but it's the right step. You get to say, how are you going to call me? I know all of you English majors are cringing at they, them, but it's too late. English has moved on. Sorry, Margot. So the gender thing has always bugged me as well. It's broken my heart over and over and over again. I like my bits. My bits are great. What I do not like is what everybody tells me to put on my bits. You know? I'm happy with how I was built, but I was the only girl in the Iowa Comic Book Club. I was the only girl in the game store. I've been the only woman in the room at multiple companies. I am sick of being told who I should be. And this is from William Moulton Marston, the creator of Wonder Woman. Not even girls want to be girls, so long as our feminine archetype lacks force, strength, and power. Amelie and I saw Wonder Woman together, and we screamed the whole time. It was fantastic. We need to be gender fluid. This is my favorite term. This is a real term, and this is how I identify now. I get to be whatever I want to be any day. I want to be it, but I still like she, her, because I also like English. Sorry. Working on it. So because of my passion about what women are expected to be and how women are expected to behave, several years ago, I created a website called Women Talk Design. And it was an IA effort, right? It was like, okay, people say they can't find women, so what am I going to do? I'm going to build a website where I could show off amazing women, and then conference goers would see all these amazing women, and they'd have women to walk on stage. Well, I'm afraid I did this mistake, the Omni mistake. So the problem was not that we had listings. There were other problems. So beginning of last summer, a couple of my students couldn't find internships. And I thought, it was Friday morning. It was about 7 a.m. I'd had 1 cup of coffee, but no food yet. And I thought, I'll just throw up a GoFundMe and see if I can raise $4,000 for an internship so my students could work on Women Talk Design while I go to Belize. And I raised a little bit more than that, hired 2 students, and actually started an organization. So what's interesting about it is the first thing the students did is what I didn't do, because once again, I was just doing this as a spare time thing, making these lists. They did user research. They talked to conference organizers. They talked to a ton of different people. They talked to Margot, who was an amazing mentor, thank you so much, to help them figure out why women don't speak. And it turned out women were turning down chances to speak all the time. It wasn't just that there weren't enough or the conference organizers couldn't find them, but they had a tendency to say no. And that led us in an entirely new direction. So we now, I should say Danielle Barnes, who's the CEO, now offers training to help women feel more comfortable, to help women feel more powerful. And this comes out of not just thinking about information architecture and it's a little box, or problems being IA or interaction design. It means thinking about the peanut butter and the chocolate together. We needed to have a solution that wasn't just a binder full of women, but it isn't just training. It had to be online, it had to be offline, it had to be everything. And so IA is no longer a thing that you do by itself. It's part of everything we do because information is everywhere. So what's our job as people who now are excited by information architecture and want to do something about it? Well, it's to make it be good. We need meaningful and inclusive classification. There's a lot of material out there. I could spend hours and hours telling you if I was an expert. I'm not an expert. I can just say, put in the footwork. There's a lot of material out there on how to make sure you're making your spaces inclusive and safe for everyone. GDC is starting to get better at it. It's sort of a notorious sausage fest, apologies, and they're working really hard to fix it, so bless them. Altercoff actually puts trigger warnings with every talk. I was a big force in trying to get codes of conduct at design conferences. And we still hear a lot of jokes about the COC, COC abbreviation. These are important things to help people feel safe. A trigger warning is not a political correctness thing. It's not about delicate little millennials who can't take it. It's about people who have faced really hard issues in their life and don't need to be in the middle of a room like this when they run into it again. 1 year after Eric Meyer lost his daughter on Facebook, every conference had a picture of his daughter. And every conference I cried because I knew his daughter. Every time I went to a conference, I never knew when I was going to see that little girl's face who died too young. Trigger warnings are a gift to anybody who does not want to walk into that unwarned, okay? We need models for understanding. I wish I'd learned to model a lot earlier. By model, I mean drawing ideas for understanding, the Richard Saul Wurman part of information architecture, but it's changed my life profoundly. I spent a year working hard, well, more like 5 years, but the last year getting more intense about it. And it's really allowed me to communicate hard conversations, Richard Saul Wurman's quote, like, why do people disagree? Why do you get so mad when you're late, and why do you not care? Cultures have these stresses. Or how do we give effective feedback to people so they can really hear it and feel it in their hearts? The ability to draw is the ability to communicate, and this is a huge gift. And of course, making things simple but not too simple. Always want to respect that. Interaction design and information architecture together. So a lot of you are probably young enough that you don't remember there was a great war between interaction designers and information architects, which was a very silly war, and about, 15 people knew about it. But But it was a scorched earth policy, and I think it's time to bring IA back. And I will be teaching information architects to interaction designers at Stanford. This is something I care about very much. You see the results if you watch this wonderful TED Talk, The Best Stats You've Ever Seen, by Hass Rosling. In it, you can move the numbers around to understand the space. Yes, everybody's taking a photo, or I'm going to go watch that TED Talk right now. But the ability to manipulate information in supporting understanding is very powerful. I also ran into Alexandra in the hall, and she came to me and she said, I know you're doing a recap. I really want to make sure you get this part right. She said, it's not that you shouldn't tell stories, but you should tell stories that are your own. You can talk about the news and what's happening there, but there's this moment where people say, what's your policy on gun control? Correct me if I get this wrong. What's your policy on gun control? And her son, there was a gunman and they had a lockdown. So when somebody says, what's your policy on gun control? You can say, well, I was sitting there at my desk in the Pentagon and I got that call and my stomach dropped. And then when you talk about your point of view, it's grounded in real experience. It's grounded in real emotion. You're not just some fact jockey. You're someone who's gone on a journey. When my daughter told me how much fun it was practicing for a lockdown, my stomach fell a little as well, and it reminded me of my dad telling stories about duck and cover. We need to not be afraid to tell our stories. We can't pretend we're these rational creatures that if we hear enough facts, we'll change our minds. We have to tell our stories. There is always an information architecture. We know this from the first time we did this thing. The only question is, who's designing it? Is anyone designing it? But what we don't talk about enough is that creating information architecture is always a political act. Every time you create classification, you're basing it on your history, your knowledge, the books you read, the stories you've heard, the news you've read. Information architecture is never neutral. So whose politics? Perhaps a politics of being fair, a politics of being neutral, a point of view about being inclusive is what we need to make a good information architecture. That's what good means to me. That is my long stick in the bamboo forest. I think Oppenheimer, this is from a wonderful graphic novel about the creation of the atomic bomb. He was haunted by, we're just doing science. We're just helping people win the war. And the moment the first atomic bomb went off, he said, now I have become death. Everything we do has consequences, and we cannot move fast and break things anymore. There are too many people getting broken with the things we build. However, I don't want you to boil the ocean. I know you're like, oh my God, there's so many things I gotta work on. I gotta fix this. Okay, so I suggest you pick something to do. I started Women Talk Design, and every Friday I would just add one woman to the directory. Okay, I was doing the wrong thing, but I was doing it slowly and steadily. So ask yourself, what can I do? What's something little? Learn information architecture. Buy the Polar Bear book. There's a new edition out with Jorge Arango that's pretty rocking and not as heavy as the third one. So there's that. Your wrists will survive. Support journalism. Pay for fucking journalism. I'm sorry. I pay for the New Yorker because I like my news when it's all over and somebody can explain it to me and tell me what happened. If you love the New York Times, if you love Washington Post, whatever, but pay for journalism. These people are suffering. The Guardian, I've met with a lot of them. If we want the truth, we have to pay for it. Question categories. Why should I be a woman why should I wear heels? Why should I wear makeup? Why should I wear shoes at all? Fuck it all, right? Okay. Oh, I feel so much better. And they were all birds. Learn to draw your ideas. You'll think better. And as we heard, be kind every day. Being kind every day is hard. Sometimes it means listening to somebody that you disagree with, who is really annoying you profoundly. Sometimes being kind is telling somebody a hard truth because they need to hear it. Sometimes being kind is like free hugs. It varies. but just keep being kind. Good luck. You're gonna need it. Thank you. I have no idea how long that was. I hope it was acceptable. Sure.
I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Again. I want to thank all the speakers. Oh, let me get the mic going. I want to thank you again, Christina, and all the speakers. Today has been an amazing day. I hope everybody appreciates. So I have one last announcement, which is that next year we already have speakers. We have Abby the IA, and Dan Klein is coming back. So,
Gruesome twosome.
yeah. So come back next year and have a great one. So there's also an after party, Mead Hall. If you want to go over there, we'll have a couple drinks. We'll talk about a lot, and then and then get home safe, please. Okay.
Now keep it going for Brian Durkin for the amazing work that he's done and the rest of the volunteers. Thank you all.